The night was heavy with silence. Rain tapped against the empty streets of New York, each droplet shimmering beneath the faint glow of flickering street lamps. Somewhere in the corner of a deserted park, a lone figure sat hunched forward on a weathered bench. His name was John Wick. For most, John was a legend, Baba Yaga, the man who could strike fear into the darkest of souls. But tonight he was no legend. He was just a man carrying the unbearable weight of memories, regrets, and a pain that even time could not silence. His black suit, though worn from countless battles, clung to him like a second skin. Rain streaked across his hair and face, but he made no effort to shield himself. He didn't care. The city was alive somewhere else, full of neon lights, loud clubs, and the restless heartbeat of those chasing pleasures. But here, in this forgotten corner, the world was quiet. And in that quiet, John found himself drowning. He lit a cigarette, the glow briefly illuminating his face, highlighting the deep scars, not just on his skin, but in his eyes. He inhaled deeply, holding the smoke in his lungs as though trying to fill the emptiness within. But no matter how much he inhaled, the emptiness never left. Every night felt the same, endless, pointless. He had money, he had skill, he had fear and respect written in every whisper of his name. Yet none of it mattered. The only thing he ever truly wanted, the warmth of his wife's embrace, was gone forever. The world had taken it and left him with nothing but ghosts. He leaned back against the bench, watching the rain blur the edges of the city skyline. His mind wandered. Was this it? Was this all his life would be now, fighting shadows, running from death, and sitting alone in the rain until the day he no longer rose again? But then something stirred. At first it was faint, a shuffle of footsteps breaking the rhythm of falling rain. John's instincts, razor-sharp even in despair, immediately stiffened. His hand slid toward the pistol hidden under his jacket. The weight of the weapon was familiar, comforting. Danger was something he understood. Danger was simple, but what approached him now wasn't danger. It was something far more disarming. A figure emerged slowly from the shadows of the street, a stranger, not a wealthy passerby, not a killer, not even someone who seemed to belong in this part of the city. The man was dressed in ragged clothes, soaked to the bone. His coat was torn, shoes falling apart, and his hair plastered to his forehead with rain. At first glance, he looked like just another forgotten soul, a drifter, a homeless man, someone the city had abandoned. But there was something in his walk, something unsteady yet determined, that caught John's attention. He wasn't begging, he wasn't searching, he was moving toward John with purpose. John's eyes narrowed. His grip tightened on the pistol inside his coat, but he didn't draw it yet. He simply watched, silent, calculating. The stranger stopped a few feet away, his breathing uneven, his shoulders trembling. He looked at John, not with fear, not with recognition, but with something else entirely, something raw, pain. The man's eyes carried the same weight John's did. Eyes that had seen too much, eyes that had lost too much. And for a moment, in that silence, it was as if the rain itself held its breath. John frowned, his instincts warring against his curiosity. Who was this man? What did he want? The stranger stood there for a long moment staring, as though searching for words he couldn't find. And then he stepped forward. John stiffened, ready to react to any threat. But what happened next wasn't an attack. It wasn't a plea for money. It wasn't anything John Wick could have predicted. The stranger's arms opened, and without a word, he embraced John. John froze. His body, trained through years of violence, reacted instantly, muscles tense, instincts screaming to push back, strike, or draw his weapon. No one touched John Wick without consequence. No one, and yet he didn't move. The stranger's arms tightened around him, trembling with cold and exhaustion. The hug wasn't aggressive. It wasn't calculated. It was desperate. A silent cry carved into the rain. John could feel the man's ribs against him, could hear the shallow gasps of his breath, could sense the fragility of his existence. For the first time in years, John Wick felt something he could not fight. He slowly turned his head, eyes narrowing, watching the man's soaked shoulder pressed against his own. He could smell the scent of damp cloth, of streets and suffering. The stranger said nothing, not a word. Only the shaking of his hands against John's back betrayed what he was carrying inside. John's hand, still on his pistol beneath the coat, hesitated. He could have pushed him away. He could have ended this moment in an instant, but something within him whispered otherwise. It had been years since anyone had touched him without fear. Years since any embrace came without hidden motives. This hug, it carried no threat, no demand, only pain. A pain that mirrored his own. Slowly, John let go of the pistol. His hand fell away from the weapon. His eyes softened, though only slightly, the storm within him still raging. The stranger finally spoke. His voice cracked, quiet, nearly lost in the rhythm of the rain. I don't know why," he whispered, his face still buried against John's shoulder. I felt like you needed this. Like, maybe I did too." John's jaw tightened. Words rarely reached him anymore. Promises, lies, threats, he had heard them all. But this wasn't words of manipulation. It was raw, unpolished, honest. The man pulled back slowly, his hands dropping. He looked into John's eyes for the first time, and the killer of legends saw something he had long forgotten. Recognition. Not of who John Wick was, but of what he carried. "You've lost someone," the man murmured. "Haven't you?" John didn't answer. His silence was his shield, but in his eyes the truth flickered. The stranger saw it, and he nodded softly as if confirming something to himself. "I lost her too," he continued, his voice breaking. "My wife, cancer, took everything, and now I walk these streets not knowing why I'm still here. Every day I ask myself the same question, why keep breathing when the only reason is gone?" The words struck John like a blade. His breath caught for a moment. The rain fell harder, masking the sting in his chest. This man, this forgotten soul, was voicing the very echo John carried inside him. He didn't speak. He couldn't. Instead, he studied the stranger in silence. His soaked clothes, his trembling hands, his broken spirit. He was nobody, just another man lost in the cruelty of the world. And yet, in this moment, he felt like a reflection. John finally leaned back against the bench, his posture still guarded, but less rigid now. The stranger sat down beside him, exhausted, shoulders slumping, as if the weight of his confession had drained what little strength he had left. For a while, neither spoke. The rain filled the silence, 1,000 droplets crashing around them, as if the sky itself wept. Finally, John's deep voice broke the stillness. Low, heavy. "Why me?" The stranger looked at him, eyes hollow, yet glimmering faintly with something close to recognition. "Because," he whispered, "you looked like someone who wouldn't run, someone who'd understand." John Wick stared ahead, watching the city blur in the downpour. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. Somewhere deep inside, for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel quite as empty. The rain fell endlessly, painting silver trails across the empty park. The world outside moved on, but here, on this forgotten bench, time felt different. Two men sat in silence, two shadows bound not by names or history, but by grief. John Wick had faced death more times than he could count. He had killed men who begged for mercy, men who showed no fear, and men who thought they could outlast him. But none of those encounters had ever left him feeling this unsettled. This wasn't a battlefield. This wasn't bloodshed. This was something far more dangerous. It was vulnerability. The stranger sat hunched forward, his elbows on his knees, rain dripping from his hair. His chest rose and fell unevenly, like a man still fighting invisible weight. John studied him in silence. His instincts screamed to get up, to leave, to shake off this encounter before it pierced too deep. And yet, he remained. There was something undeniable in the man's presence, a reflection of his own torment. Finally, the stranger spoke again, his voice low, tired, yet steady. "You know, people avoid me. They look at me like I'm already dead. Some don't even see me at all. But when I saw you sitting here," he hesitated, his gaze fixed on the rain. "I saw the same look I wear every night." John's jaw clenched. He didn't want to admit it, didn't want to acknowledge that this broken man was right. But deep down he knew. The hollow stare, the silent ache, the exhaustion of carrying memories too heavy to put down. They were both men drowning simply in different rivers. The stranger glanced sideways at him. "I don't know your story. Don't need to. But I know loss when I see it." John remained still, his face a mask of stone. But inside, the words struck a chord. Memories of Helen flashed through him. The warmth of her smile, the way her laugh used to fill their home, the final gift she left him before death took her away. He had built his entire existence around her absence, his rage fueling an endless war against those who wronged him. But beneath all of it, the truth was simple. He was alone. For a long moment, the silence stretched again. Then, without warning, the stranger let out a short, bitter laugh. Funny, isn't it? The world doesn't care. Doesn't stop. People like us. We just fade into the cracks while life moves on without us. His voice broke on the last words, and he rubbed at his face as though trying to erase the pain etched there. John's eyes softened. He had no comforting words. Words had never been his strength. But something inside him shifted. This man's confession wasn't weakness, it was honesty. The kind of honesty John hadn't allowed himself in years. For the first time, he spoke without calculation, without the armor of silence. His deep voice carried through the rain. "You're right." The stranger looked at him, startled by the rare response. John continued, his tone heavy, deliberate. "The world doesn't stop. It never does, it just keeps taking, piece by piece." The man's eyes glistened, as though hearing those words from someone else was both unbearable and necessary. He nodded slowly, like a man who had finally been understood, and then, without planning, without thinking, the stranger's hand reached out and rested lightly on John's arm, not in pity, not in weakness, but in recognition, a wordless way of saying, "I see you. I know you. You are not alone in this pain." For a man like John Wick, who had built his life on violence, it was disarming. More than bullets, more than knives, more than enemies in the dark, this simple human touch cut deeper, because it was something he could not fight. The two men sat there, drenched in rain, bound by nothing but silence and scars. No names exchanged, no promises made. But in that fleeting moment, John Wick, Baba Yaga, the legend, the killer, felt something he had not felt in a long, long time. He felt human. The rain didn't stop. It fell heavier now, soaking both men to the bone. Yet neither moved. Neither sought shelter. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storms within. John Wick sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the ground, his body still carved in stone. The stranger beside him trembled, his frail hands clenching as though holding on to the last threads of strength he had left. Then, without warning, the man leaned forward. His arms rose once again, and before John could react, the stranger pulled him into an embrace. This time, John didn't freeze. He resisted. His body stiffened, muscles tightening like coiled steel. His instincts screamed, "Push him away. Break free. No one gets this close." Years of violence had taught him that closeness meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant death. But the stranger's hold wasn't forceful. It wasn't calculated. It wasn't a trick. It was desperate. It was human, and that, more than anything, disarmed him. John's fists remained clenched at his sides, his breathing uneven. His eyes darted around as if expecting enemies to emerge from the shadows, waiting for this one moment of weakness to strike. But there were no enemies here. Only the sound of falling rain and the warmth of a broken man's embrace. For years, John had drowned in loneliness. He had walked through blood-soaked halls, slept beside loaded guns, fought battles no man should survive. But in all that chaos, in all that violence, he had forgotten what it felt like, to simply be held. The stranger whispered against his shoulder, his voice trembling, "I don't know who you are. I don't know what you've done, but I know pain when I feel it. You're carrying the same weight I am. And maybe tonight we don't have to carry it alone." The words pierced through John like a blade. His chest rose sharply, his breath catching. Helen's face flashed in his mind. Her gentle smile, her touch, the way she had once wrapped her arms around him in the quiet of their home. It had been so long since he'd felt anything like it. So long since he'd allowed anyone close enough, and now here he was. John Wick, the world's deadliest assassin, sitting in the rain, held not by an enemy, not by an ally, but by a stranger. For a moment, he fought it. He tried to keep the walls up, to bury the ache, to pretend that he was still made of iron, but the hug lingered. The stranger's arms shook, his body weak, but his embrace carried something stronger than force. It carried truth. And slowly, painfully, John Wick's walls cracked. His fists loosened, his shoulders dropped, and for the first time in years, John Wick let himself lean into another human being. The world around them blurred. The rain fell harder, thunder growled in the distance, but John didn't hear it anymore. What he heard was silence, the silence inside him finally breaking. A tear, hot despite the cold rain, slid down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He didn't hide it. He let it fall, vanishing into the storm. The stranger couldn't see it, but he felt it, the slight shudder in John's body, the faint exhale that carried years of buried grief. No one had ever dared to embrace John Wick. Not like this. Not without fear. Not without motive, and that was why this hug shattered him. It wasn't about the man who gave it. It wasn't about who he was or what he wanted. It was about what it meant. That even in the darkest corners of the world, where death lurked in every shadow, humanity could still reach him. When the embrace finally loosened, the stranger pulled back, his eyes searching John's face. And for the first time, John didn't hide. He let the man see the crack in the mask. The pain, the exhaustion. The humanity neither spoke. They didn't need to. The hug had said everything. The hug had ended, but its weight lingered. The stranger sat back down, his chest rising and falling heavily, as though the embrace had drained the last strength from his weary frame. John, however, remained still, his eyes lowered, his face unreadable. But inside something had cracked. Something had shifted. For years, John Wick had survived by walls, cold, unbreakable walls that kept people out and kept his grief contained. But one stranger, one embrace had cut through them. And now, John felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that terrified him more than bullets ever could. The rain hammered harder, dripping from his face, mingling with the tear he hadn't wiped away. He sat silently, staring at the ground, while the stranger leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You don't have to say anything," the man murmured, his voice rough with exhaustion. "I can see it. You're hurting. Just like me." John's jaw clenched, but he didn't look away. The man gave a faint, broken laugh. "Strange, isn't it? Two people who've lost everything, ending up here, in the same storm. Maybe the universe isn't as cruel as we think. Maybe it put us here tonight for a reason." John shifted slightly, uncomfortable with the thought. He had never believed in fate, never trusted the idea that the world offered meaning. To him, life was just survival, pain, and the occasional fleeting moment of peace. And yet, something about this meeting felt different. The stranger's voice cracked as he continued. "When my wife died, I stopped living too. Oh, I kept breathing, walking, existing, but living. No, that ended with her." He paused, his hands trembling as they rubbed together for warmth. "I thought maybe tonight, maybe I'd just let the storm take me. Let the cold finish what life already had." John's eyes narrowed, his breath slowing. He knew that thought all too well. He had wrestled with it in the long nights, staring into the abyss, wondering why he still woke each morning when there was nothing left to wake for. The stranger turned toward him suddenly, his gaze sharp despite the exhaustion. "But then I saw you, sitting here, and for the first time, I didn't feel alone. I thought, if someone else is still carrying it, maybe I can carry it too. Just a little longer." The words struck John like a quiet thunderbolt. For so long, he had convinced himself he was alone in his suffering, that no one could possibly understand the weight he bore. But here was a man, a stranger, mirroring his torment, his questions, his emptiness. For the first time, John felt something stir inside him. Not rage, not vengeance. Something quieter. Something he hadn't felt in years. Responsibility. He realized in that moment that his presence, his very survival, had given this man a reason to keep going. And that realization carried more weight than any bullet, any contract, any bloodshed. John finally spoke, his voice low, gravelly but steady. "You can't quit." The stranger blinked, startled by the sudden command. John turned toward him, his dark eyes fierce despite the exhaustion etched into them. "Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not while you can still breathe. You don't stop. You keep moving." The man's lip trembled, his throat tightening. "But why? What's left for me?" John's gaze dropped briefly, memories flashing. Helen's smile, the home they once shared, the life stolen too soon. His voice softened, carrying the weight of every loss he'd endured, because someone you loved wouldn't want you to stop. The stranger's breath hitched. His head dropped into his hands as the words sank in. Rain plastered his hair against his face, but John could see it, the faint shake of his shoulders, the silent sobs he tried to contain. For a moment, John wanted to reach out, to offer the same touch he had just received. But his hands remained still. He wasn't ready for that yet. Instead, he gave the only thing he could offer: his presence, his words, his unshakable conviction. The stranger finally looked up, tears cutting through the grime and rain on his cheeks. He nodded slowly, as though John's words had anchored him. Then, "I promise," he whispered. "I'll keep going. One more day. One more step." For her, John studied him silently. The promise wasn't much, but it was something. And in the quiet of the storm, it mattered more than anything else. For the first time in years, John Wick felt that his existence, the pain he carried, the survival he clung to, had given someone else a reason to keep breathing. And that, in itself, felt like a small victory against the darkness. The two men sat side by side as the storm raged on, strangers no longer. Bound not by history but by loss, by survival, by a fragile promise made in the rain. The rain began to ease. The storm that had raged all night slowly softened, its fury dimming into a quiet drizzle. The sky, once black and merciless, now carried the faintest hint of dawn on the horizon. The city stirred in the distance, unaware of the silent war that had unfolded on a forgotten bench. John Wick and the stranger still sat side by side. Neither spoke for a long time. Words had already done their part. Now silence carried the weight of everything unspoken, the pain, the promises, the fragile thread of hope that bound them together. John's eyes traced the outline of the stranger. The man looked smaller now, fragile but lighter, as though laying down his grief had eased the burden on his shoulders. His hands no longer trembled as fiercely. His breathing, once ragged, had steadied, and John realized something. This man, broken and unknown, had come to him with nothing but pain. And yet somehow in the storm they had both left pieces of that pain behind. The stranger turned, his voice soft, almost unsure. "I don't even know your name." John hesitated. Names carried weight. His name in particular carried fear, history, and death. He considered not answering, but the man before him wasn't an enemy. He wasn't part of that world. To him, John was not the Baba Yaga. He was just another man. Finally, John spoke. His voice was low, almost reluctant. "John." The stranger nodded slowly, as though committing the name to memory. "Thank you, John." John didn't reply. Gratitude felt foreign, almost unnecessary. But inside something stirred, a recognition. This stranger, this nameless soul, had given him something no amount of bloodshed or vengeance ever could. A reminder that even in the ruins of his life, connection was still possible. The man slowly rose to his feet, unsteady but determined. His soaked clothes clung to his body, his shoes squelched in the mud, but there was resolve in his movements now. He looked down at John, rain dripping from his chin, and whispered the words like a vow. "I'll keep my promise. One more day, then another, until it matters again." John lifted his gaze. Their eyes met one final time. No handshakes, no farewells, just an unspoken understanding. The stranger turned and walked away, disappearing into the city streets. His figure grew smaller, swallowed by the pale light of morning. John remained seated on the bench, alone once more. But the silence felt different now. Not hollow, not suffocating, different. For years, John Wick had walked through life like a ghost, consumed by vengeance, shackled to his grief. But tonight, a stranger had touched a part of him he thought was dead. A stranger's hug had disarmed him more completely than any weapon ever could. He leaned back, tilting his face toward the soft drizzle, eyes closing briefly. He thought of Helen, not as a ghost that haunted him, but as the memory of warmth, of love, of a reason to keep moving forward. Perhaps he wasn't ready to forgive the world. Perhaps he never would be. But maybe, just maybe, he could still find meaning. Not in blood, not in death, but in small, fragile connections that reminded him he was still human. The faint light of dawn stretched across the park, brushing the wet pavement with a golden glow. John stood slowly, adjusting his soaked suit, the weight of the night still heavy, but no longer unbearable. He slipped his hand into his coat, feeling the cold steel of his pistol. The weapon had always been his answer, his shield, his curse. But this morning he realized something. Not every battle needed a gun. Not every enemy was out there. Some enemies lived inside, and tonight, for the first time, he had won against them. John took one last look at the empty street where the stranger had disappeared. He whispered under his breath, the words barely audible but heavy with meaning. "Keep your promise." Then he turned, his footsteps echoing softly against the wet ground. The city awaited him. Shadows still lingered, enemies still plotted, death still followed close behind. But tonight had given him something even the underworld could never take away, a reminder that even John Wick, the Baba Yaga, the killer, the legend, was still capable of being human. And as the first light of day broke through the clouds, John walked on carrying not just his grief, but a fragile spark of hope born from a stranger's hug he never expected.